Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. Today we present a sponsored podcast discussion on the implications of the European Parliament's recent approval of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. This sweeping April 2016 law establishes a fundamental right to personal data protection for European Union citizens. It gives enterprises that hold personal data on all these people just 2 years to reach privacy compliance or face stiff financial penalties. But while organizations must work quickly to comply with GDPR, the strategic benefits of doing so could stretch far beyond data privacy issues alone. Attaining a far stronger general security posture, one that also provides a business competitive advantage, may well be the more impactful implication. We're now joined by 3 cybersecurity and legal experts to explore the new EU data privacy regulation and present ways that companies can begin to extend these needed compliance measures into essential business benefits. Here to help us sort through the practical path of working within the requirements of a single digital market for the EU, please join me in welcoming Tim Griefson. He's the Chief Cyber and Security Strategist, Enterprise Security Products EMEA at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, and great to be here.
We're also here with David Kemp, EMEA Specialist Business Consultant at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Good to have you with us, David.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to share our experiences, especially thanks to our relationship with PwC Legal.
Right, and we are here too with Stuart Room, Global Head of Cybersecurity and Data Protection at PwC Legal. Welcome, Stuart.
Thanks, Dana. It's great to be here.
Tim, let's begin with you and perhaps focus a little bit on the positive side of this. The GDPR could mean significant financial penalties in less than 2 years if organizations don't protect all their targeted data. But how can large organizations look at this as under a larger umbrella, perhaps looking at this as a way of quickening their own security posture?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for organizations to really take a step back and review their handling of personal information and security as a whole. You know, historically, security has all been about locking things down and saying no, and we need to sort of break that mold. But I actually think this is an opportunity because it's pan-European to really take a step back, look at the controls that we have in place, look at the people, look at the technology holistically, and really look at identifying opportunities where we can help to drive new revenues for the organization, but doing it in a safe and secure manner.
David, is there much difference between privacy and security? If one has to comply with a regulation, doesn't that also give them the ability to better master and control their own internal destiny when it comes to digital assets?
Well, that's precisely what a major European insurance company headquartered in London said the other day to us. They regard GDPR as a catalyst for their own organization to appreciate that their records management at the heart of their organization is chaotic. And furthermore, they are looking at, with hopefully guidance from PwC Legal, is for us to provide them with an ability to enforce the policy of GDPR, but expand this out further into a major records management facility.
And Stuart, wouldn't your own legal requirements for any number of reasons be bolstered by having this better management and privacy capability?
The GDPR obviously is a legal regime, so it's going to make the legal focus much, much greater in organizations. I think that the idea that the GDPR can be a catalyst for wider business enabling change, it must be right. There's a lot of people we see at the client side have been waiting for the big story to get over the silos, to develop more holistic treatment for data and security. So I think this is just going to be great regardless of the legal components for businesses that want to approach it with the right kind of mindset.
Now, we have a global audience. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, just to complement that, was a recognition that I heard the other day, which was of a corporate client saying, I get it. If we could install a facility that would help us with this particular regulation, to a certain extent, relying once again on external counsel to assist us, we could almost feed any other regulation into the same engine. Now, that is very material in terms of getting sponsorship, buy-in, interest from the front of the business, because this isn't a facility just simply for this one particular type of regulation. There's so much more that could be engaged on.
Mm-hmm. I think the important part there is it's a cultural shift in mindset. It's not a box-ticking exercise. It's absolutely opportunity. If you think of it in that mindset of looking holistically, you can really maximize the opportunities that are out there.
And great. And because we have a global audience for our podcast and blog, I think that this might be a point on the arrow for a much larger market than the European Union. But let's learn about what this entails, because not everyone is familiar with it yet. So in a nutshell, what does this new law require large companies to do? Tim, would you like to take that?
Yeah, can do. It ultimately it's about protecting the citizens of Europe's private and personal information. So, the legislation talks about how to. I'll give some guidance around how to protect data. So it talks about encryption. It talks about anonymization of the information. Should that inevitable breach happen. But it also talks about how to enable a quicker response for a breach. But to go back to David's point earlier on, I think that the key part of this is really around record management. It's understanding what information you have where, classifying that information, and what you need to do with it. I think is key to this, because ultimately the bad guys out there. If I think of from my world. As an ex-CIO and as ex-CISO, I was always looking to try and protect myself from the bad guys, which are now changing their process to monetize. So they're ultimately out to steal something, whether it be credit card information, personal information, intellectual property. And what we find is often organizations don't actually understand what information they have where, who owns it. And quite often they don't actually value that data. So I think this is a great approach to help them do that. And
what happens if they don't comply? This is a fairly stiff penalty regime.
It is. There's up to 4% of the parent company's annual revenue is exposed, as part of a fine. But also there's a mandatory breach notification where companies need to inform the authorities within 72 hours of a breach. And what we find, if I think of the Ponemon report, the average time that a bad guy is inside an organization is 243 days. So clearly that's going to be a challenge for lots of organizations who don't know they've been breached. But also there's that remediation afterwards once that, that inevitable breach happens. On average globally, that's anywhere between 40 and 47 days. And we're seeing that trend going in the wrong direction. We're seeing it getting, more expensive. On average, a breach costing in excess of $7.7 million. But we're also seeing the time to remediate going up. So, this is what I talked about, this cultural change in thinking. We need to get much smarter about understanding the data we've got and when we've had that inevitable breach. So it's protecting the data.
And Stuart, how does this affect companies that might not just be based in the EU countries, companies that deal with any customers or supply chain partners, alliances, ecosystem? Give us a sense of the concentric circles of impact that this portends for inside the EU and beyond.
Yes, the law has global effect, so it's not about just regulating European activities or protecting or controlling European data. So the way it works is that any entity or data controller that's outside of Europe that targets Europe for goods and services. So it doesn't need to have an establishment, a physical presence in Europe. If it targets for goods and services, it will be directly regulated. Or if that entity profiles and tracks the activity of European citizens on the web, they're regulated as well. So those are entities that are physically not in Europe. Any entity outside of Europe that receives European data or data from Europe for data processing is regulated as well. And then any entity that's outside of Europe that exports data into Europe is going to be regulated as well. So it has global effect. It's not about the physical boundaries of Europe or the presence only of data in Europe. It's whether there's an effect on Europe or an effect on European people's data.
And if I could add to that, the other point is that those on the fringes of the European Union, because that is where this is originating from, such as Norway and Switzerland, and even South Africa with the POPI legislation. All three of these countries not part of the European Union, but as Stuart's saying, because a lot of their trade is going through the European Union, they are adopting local regulation in order to mirror it, in order to provide a level playing field for their corporates.
And this notion of a fundamental right to personal data protection, is that something new? Is that a departure? And does that vary greatly from country to country or region to region? I'll open that to anyone.
Right, shall I go first, or it's Stuart?
Yes, please.
This is not a new concept. So European data protection law was first promulgated in the late 1960s. So that's when it was all invented, if you like. And the first European legislative instruments about data privacy were in 1973 and 74. And we've had international data protection legislation in place since 1980 with the OECD, the Council of Europe in 1981. The Data Protection Directive, of course, 1995. So we're talking stuff that is almost 2 generations old, if you like, in terms of priority and effect. The idea that there is a fundamental right to data protection has been articulated expressly within the EU treaties for a while now. So it's important that entities don't fall into the trap of feeling that they're dealing with something new. They're actually dealing with something with a huge amount of history. Because it has a huge amount of history, both the problems and the solutions are well understood. So if the first time you deal with data protection is because you feel that this is new now, you're probably misaligned with the sophistication of those people who would scrutinize you and be critical of you. So it's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fair to say there's other legislation as well that in certain industries that makes some organisations actually much better prepared for dealing with what's in the new legislation. So for example, in the finance industry, you've got PCI security around credit card data. So I believe that some companies are going to be better prepared than others. But that being said, it still gives us an opportunity as an order to go back and look at what you've got and where it fits.
All right, let's move towards looking at this through the solution lens. One of the ways that the law apparently makes it possible for this information to perhaps even leave its protected environment is if it's properly encrypted. Is there a silver bullet here where if everything's encrypted, that solves your problem? Or how does that oversimplify things? I open that up to any of you.
So I don't think there's a silver bullet. Encryption is about disruption. Because ultimately, as I said earlier, the bad guys are out to steal data if I come from a cyber attack point of view. And even the most sophisticated technologies can at some point be bypassed. But what it does do is it reduces that impact and potentially the bad guys will go elsewhere. But remember, this is not just about the bad guys. It's also about people who may have done something inadvertently, in releasing the data. So I think encryption has a part to play, but it's one of the components. On top of that, you've got technology around, having the right people and the right process, and having, the data protection officer in place, and training your business users and your customers and your suppliers. So, I don't think the encryption part is the only component, but it's one of the tools in your kit bag to help reduce the likelihood of the data actually being commoditized and monetized.
And this concept of the personally identifiable information, how does that play a role? And should companies that haven't been using that as a designation or an emphasis perhaps rethink the types of data and the types of identification with it?
So can I come in on that? It's Stuart. So if I may, please. The idea of PII, personally identifiable information, is known to U.S. law. So it lives inside the U.S. legal environment, and it's mainly constrained to a number of distinct data sets. So my point is that the idea of PII is narrow. The data protection regime is concerned with something else, personal data. And personal data is any information relating to an identifiable living individual. And when you look at how the legislation is built, it's much, much, much more expansive than the idea of PII, which seems to be around name, address, social security number, credit card information, things like that, into any online identifier that could be connected to an individual. The human genome is an example of personal data. So it's important that listeners in a global sense understand the expansiveness of the idea, or rather they understand that it's the EU definition of personal data is intended to be highly, highly expansive.
Mm-hmm. And David Kemp, when we're thinking about where we should focus our efforts first, is this primarily about business to consumer data? Is it about business to business, less so or more so, or even internally for business to employee? Is there a way for us to segment and prioritize among these groups as to what is perhaps the most in peril of being in violation of this new law?
On the basis of it's more about a commercial view rather than legal one, I'd suggest that the obvious example would be business to consumer, so where you're dealing with a supermarket like Walmart in the US, or Co-op, or Waitrose in Europe, for example. That is very clearly my personal information as I go to the supermarket. But quite interesting, 2 weeks ago I was listening to the head of privacy at Statoil, the major Norwegian energy company, and they said, we have no business to consumer, but in fact even just simply the employee information we have is critical to us, and we are taking this extremely seriously as the way in which we manage this. Of course, therefore, that means this applies to every single corporate, but it is both an internal and an external aggregation of information.
Mm-hmm.
I think the important thing is... Sorry, Dana.
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the interesting thing is as digital disruption, comes to all organizations, and we start to see, the proliferation and the tsunami of data and being gathered, it becomes more of a challenge or an opportunity, depending on how you look at that. So literally the new perimeter is on your mobile phone, on your cell phone, where people are accessing cloud services. So, if I use the British Airways app, for example, I'm literally accessing 18 cloud services from my mobile phone. But that then, makes it a target for that data to be gathered. And do I really understand what's being stored where? And I think that's where this really helps, is trying to formalize what information is stored where and how it's being transacted and used.
And on another level of segmentation, is this very much different for a government or public organization versus a private? And there might be, of course, some verticals like finance or health where they've become accustomed to protecting data. But does this have implications for the public sector as well?
So it's Stuart here. Yeah, the public sector is regulated by this. There's a separate directive that's been adopted to cover policing and law enforcement, but the public sector has been in scope for a very long time now.
Mm-hmm. All right. How does one go about the solution on a bit more granular level? Somebody mentioned the idea of the data protection officer. Do we have any examples or methodologies that sort of make for a good approach to this, both at the tactical level of compliance, but at the larger strategic level of a better total data and security posture? So what do we do? What's the idea of a data protection officer or office? And is that a first step, or how does one begin? I'll open that to all of you.
And I'm happy to jump in if you want.
Sure.
Unless anyone else wants to take it. So what's really important, what we're stressing to entities is that don't view this as a compliance issue. That there are three legs to the stool that entities need to understand. So there's the economic goals that they have through the use of data or from data itself. So economically, what are we trying to do? Then the second issue is the question of risk and where does our risk appetite lie in the context of the economic issue. And then the third is obligation, so compliance. So it's really important that those three things are dealt with or considered at the very beginning and at the same time. So if we think about the idea simply of risk management, if we were to look at risk management in isolation of an economic goal, you could easily build a technology system that doesn't actually deliver any gain. So a good example would be personalization and customer insights. There's a huge amount of risk associated with that, and if you didn't have the economic voice within the conversation, you could easily fail to build the right kind of insight or personalization engine. So bringing those together are really important. Once you've brought those things together in the conversation, the question is, what's your vision? So what's your desired end state? What is it that you're trying to achieve in light of those three things? And then building out from there. In a tactical sense, what a lot of people are doing is, a lot of entities are doing is they're making tactical decisions absent the strategic decision. So we know that in a tactical sense, it's incredibly important to do data mapping, data analysis, and we feel at PwC that that's a really, really critical step to take. But you ought to be doing that data mapping in the context of a strategic view, because it affects the order of priority and how you tackle the work. So some non-obvious matters will become clearer than data mapping might be if you take the proper strategic view. So a specific example of that would be complaints handling. So not many people have actually got complaints handling on the agenda. So how do we operate inside the call center, for instance, if people are cross? Is probably a much more important strategic decision at the very beginning than some of the more obvious steps that you might take. So bringing those things forward and having a desired end state, a vision for a desired end state, will tell you the steps that you ought to take and in what order.
Thank you, Stuart. Tim, this isn't something you buy out of a box, but the security implications of being able to establish if a breach has taken place in as little as 72 hours sounds to me like it involves an awful lot more than a product or even a service, almost perhaps a cultural shift, an organizational shift. So how should one approach this from that security perspective, and how should one start?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. This is not a single product or a point solution. You've really got to bake it into the culture of your organization, and focus not just about the single solutions, but actually the end-to-end interactions between the user, the data, and the application of the data. And if you do that, what you're starting to look at is how do you build things in a safe, secure manner, but how do you build them to enable your business to do something? So there's no point in building a data lake, for example, and gathering all this data unless you've actually got some insight from that data, which is actionable and measured back to the business outcomes. So I think the first thing is I actually don't use the word security often when I'm talking to customers. I'll talk about protection, whether that be protection of revenue, whether it be growing new markets, is to put it into business language rather than using technology language, I think is the first thing, because that puts people off. I think the second thing is really to understand, what is it you're going to protect and why, where does it reside, and then start to build the culture from the top down and also from the bottom up. So it's not just the data protection officer's problem or issue to deal with. It's not just the CIO or the CISO. It's building a culture in your organization where it becomes normal, everyday business. Good security is good business. And then...
Yes.
Go on.
Go ahead. Yes, please go on.
I was then going to say that, once you've done that, it's about, this is not a project. It's not a do it once and forget it. It's really around building a journey, but this is an evolving journey. So it's not just a matter of doing it, getting to the point where you have that checkbox to say, yes, you're compliant. It's absolutely around continuing to look at how you're doing your business, continuing to look at your data. As new markets come on, as new data comes on, you have to reassess where you are in this structure. I think that's really important. But the key thing for me is if you focus on that data, focus on those interactions, you have less of a conversation about the technology. The technology is an enabler, but you do need a good mix of people, process, and technology to deliver good, security in a data-driven organization.
Yes. David Kemp, given that this cuts across different groups within a large organization that may not have had very much interactions in the past, given that this is not just technology but process and people, as Tim mentioned, how does the relationship between Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and PwC come together to help organizations solve that? Perhaps you could describe the alliance a bit for us.
Absolutely. And the way I put it, I'm actually a lawyer by profession, is I very much respect our ability to collaborate with PwC, which is a global alliance of ours, on the basis that I regard Stuart and his very considerable department as providing a translation of the regulation into deliverables. What is it that you want me to do? What does the regulation say? It may say that you have to safeguard information. So what does that entail? So I see really there are sort of three major steps here. One is the external counsel guidance on what the regulation means into a set of deliverables. Secondly, a privacy audit, to use a non-term of art, meaning just simply, where are you? As Stuart was describing, this has been around in terms of cultural concept since the 1960s. So where are you already in terms of your management of PII? So when that is complete, then we can deduce, so what is the technology that you might need in order to make this work? And that is really where very much Hewlett-Packard Enterprise would come in. So that's the sequence. Then, if we just look very simply at the IT architecture, what's needed? Well, as we said right at the beginning, or I said my view is that this is the thin end of the wedge of records management, coherent strategy in an organization. So one of the first things is, can you connect to the sources of data around your organization, given that most entities have grown up by acquisition and not organically? So firstly, can you actually connect to and read the information where it is, wherever it is around the world, in whatever silo? I mean, for example, Volkswagen, a little problem they have in relation to diesel emissions. But one of the features there is not so much, of course, how do they defend themselves, but how do they get to the basic information in however many countries as to whether a particular sales director knew about this issue or not. So connectivity is the one point. The second thing is being able to capture information but without moving it across border That is where technology which handles the metadata, the basic components of a particular piece of digital information can be captured, whether it's structured or unstructured. And let's bear in mind that when we're talking about data, we're talking about could be audio or visual or alphanumeric. Can we bring that together and can we capture it? And then can we apply rules to it? Because effectively, if you had to say in a nutshell, what is Hewlett-Packard doing as a collaboration with PwC, we are doing policy enforcement. Whatever Stuart's and his professional colleagues advise in relation to the deliverables, we are seeking to effect that and make that work across the organization. So I think that's an easy way to describe it, even to non-technical people, so general counsel, heads of compliance or risk. I think they can appreciate not only those three steps of the legal interpretation, the privacy audit, and then the architecture, and then secondly, this building up of the acquisition of information in order to be able to make sure that the standards which are set by PwC are actually being complied with.
Right. Well, we're coming up towards the end of our time, but I really wanted to get into some examples to describe what it looks like when one, or as an organization, does this correctly, what the metrics of success are. How do you measure yourself towards a state of compliance and attainment? Do any of you have an example of an organization that has gone through many of these paces, has acquired the right process, technology, and culture, and what does that look like when you get there or near there?
It's Stuart here. So there's a whole variety of metrics that people have put in place, and it depends which principles you're talking about. So we've got, obviously, security, which we've spoken about quite a lot here, but there's other principles: accuracy, retention, delete, transfers, on and on and on. But one of the metrics that entities that are putting in, which is non-security controlled, is about the number of people who are successfully participating in training sessions and passing the little examination at the very end. And the reason why that KPI is important is that during enforcement cases, when things go wrong, and there are lots and lots of these cases out there, the same kind of challenges are presented by the regulators and by litigants, and that's an example of one of them. So when you're building your metrics and your KPIs, it's important to think not just about the measures that will achieve operational privacy and operational security, but also think about the metrics that people who would be adverse to you would understand. Judges, regulators, litigants, etc. Because there are essentially two kinds of metrics: operational results metrics, but also the judgment metrics that people may apply to you.
And either Tim or David at HPE, do you have any examples, or perhaps maybe describe why we think that doing this correctly could get you into a better competitive business position? What is it about doing this that not only allows you to be compliant, but puts you in an advantageous position in a market in terms of innovation and execution?
Well, I think if I could quote some of our clients, especially in the Nordic region, if you like, there are about 6 major reasons for paying strict and urgent attention to this particular subject. One of them, I personally would say, and listening to my clients, is to do with compliance. That is the most obvious one. That is the one that has the biggest sanction. But I would say that there are another 5 arguments, I won't go all of them, but which are to do with advancement of the business. So, for example, a major media company in Finland said, if we could only be able to say on our website that we were GDPR compliant, that would increase materially the customer belief in our respect for their information, and it would give us a market advantage. So it's actually advancing the business. The second aspect, which I sort of anticipate, but I've also heard from corporates, and that is, in due course, if it's not here already, there might be a case where governments would say, if you're not GDPR compliant, then you can't bid on our contracts. And a third might be to do with what if, as Tim was referring to earlier, you wanted to make best use of this information? There's even a possibility of corporations taking the PII, making sure it's fully anonymous or pseudonymized, and then mixing it with other freely available information, such as Facebook, and actually saying to a customer, David, we'd like to use your PII fully anonymized. We can prove to you that we've followed the PwC legal guidance. And furthermore, if we do use this information and use it for analytics, we might even want to pay you for this. What are you doing? You're increasing the bonding and loyalty with your customers. So I do think we should think about the upsides of the business advancement, which ironically is coming out of a regulation, but which may not be so obvious.
Mm-hmm. Let's start to close up, but maybe some practical hints for folks as to how to get started, where to find more resources, both on the GDPR, but also on the means by which we've been describing to go about a better data privacy capability. Any thoughts about where we go to begin the process? Let me start with you, David.
I would say that in the public domain, there is the European Union is extremely good at promulgating information about the regulation itself coming in and providing some basic interpretation. But then, to be honest, I would then hand on to Stuart in terms of what PwC Legal is already providing in the public domain. But can I pass that on to you, Stuart?
Yes, thanks ever so much. So we've got two accelerators that we've built to help entities go forward. So the first is our GDPR Readiness Assessment Tool, the RAT, and lots of multinationals run the RAT at the very beginning of their GDPR programs. So what it does, it asks 70 key questions against the two domains of operational and legal privacy. So privacy architecture and privacy principles mapped into a maturity matrix that assesses people's confidence about where they stand. And all of that is then mapped into the articles and recitals of the GDPR. So lots of our clients use the RAT. And then the second accelerator we've got is the PwC Privacy and Security Enforcement Tracker. So we've been tracking the results of regulatory cases and litigation in this area over many years that gives us a very granular insight into the real priorities of regulators and litigants and judges. So using those two tools at the very beginning gives you a good insight into where you are and what your risk priorities are.
Last word to you, Tim. Any thoughts on getting started, resources, places to go to get on your journey or further along?
Yeah, I think you need to involve the whole organisation. As I said earlier on, it's not just about passing it over to the data protection officer. You need to have the buy-in from every part of the organisation. And clearly working with organisations who understand the GDPR, understand the legal implications, such as the collaboration between PwC and HPE, is where I would go. When I was in the seat as a CISO before, I'm not a legal expert. So one of the first things that I did is I went and got that expertise and brought it in. So I'd say that's probably the first place I would start, is getting buy-in from the business and making sure that you have the right people around the table to help you on the journey.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been discussing the implications of the European Parliament's recent approval of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. And we've heard how attaining a far stronger general security posture, one that also provides a competitive business advantage, may well be among the more impactful beneficial consequences of this new regulation. So please join me now in thanking our guests. We've been here with Tim Griefson, Chief Cyber and Security Strategist, Enterprise Security Products, EMEA, at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you. Good day.
And we've been joined by David Kemp, EMEA Specialist Business Consultant, also at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Thank you, David.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
And also Stuart Room, Cybersecurity and Data Protection at PwC Legal. Thank you so much, Stuart.
Thanks ever so much.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this Hewlett-Packard Enterprise-sponsored Security Market Transformation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of practical business benefits discussions. Thanks again for listening, and do come back next time.